Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Creativity channel. And I have a special guest today meeting with me. It's Ekaterina Sheath, who is an illustrator, a mural artist, and can I call you a facilitator as well? In terms
Yeah.
of your work, working with the community and
Mhm.
working on different creative projects as well. And you're currently based in and around Leeds and Yorkshire as well. So welcome, Katerina. Welcome onto the channel.
Right.
Thank you for
Thank
coming on
you.
today.
No worries, my pleasure.
So I thought we could start off our little interview with an introduction from yourself. So I've given a little introduction on my end, but I'd love to hear it in your own words from you in terms of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, like you said, I'm an illustrator and I'm a mural artist. So, I specialize predominantly in doing public art installations, whether that's a hand-painted mural or a massive piece of digital art that goes up inside, I don't know, a chimney, or it goes on top installed on empty shop units, or their little painted media boxes. There's lots of different contexts of which my work has appeared across Leeds and across Yorkshire, which has been really exciting. But yeah, like you said, a huge part of my process and the inspiration behind my work is community engagement. So that's working with young people or elderly groups, or working with specific communities according to the commission. And yeah, often that leads me down a passion for history and oral histories as well. So lots of different things coming into play when I do my commissions. But that's a short little summary before we get into it.
Yeah, fantastic. It sounds great. And you're already touching upon other things that I'd love to explore in the interview. So that's wonderful. Okay. So, my next question to you is in terms of when you decided that, creativity is a road that you wanted to explore in your life. And I suppose, did you always consider yourself a creative person? And how did you know that, you were creative or wanted to go down a creative route? Was there a point in your life when it sort of came to you, that realization, or maybe someone else made you realize that you're creative? How did that look like for you?
It was well, it just kind of was organic in the sense that I'd always loved drawing and loved making as a tiny kid. My mum has so many stories of me just getting into paint when I shouldn't be, and her having to essentially like strap me into a chair, and I'll be happy for hours just making and making and making. And that was probably the only thing that kept me out of trouble because I was quite a naughty kid. But yeah, and I always loved making, and I think it was something that I just did very effortlessly in the concept of I just did it all the time, and it just brought me a lot of joy. And then luckily I came from a family that was really supportive of that, so they kind of and then I went into a school that also had like a really good support system for the arts, and that really allowed me to just flourish and create a space to kind of perfect my skills or work on them or develop them. And yeah, throughout school, it became more and more clear that this was something that I loved to do. And yeah, just it brought me a lot of joy, but I also, I guess, gave me a lot of mindfulness. And if I look at it retrospectively, but
Mm,
yeah, and then after school, when you start kind of thinking about where you want to go next, it was becoming more and more clear that I'd like to explore it at university, and also as a career. I think I'd always had that direction clear in my head, and I was just really lucky that I was surrounded by like people like my family and my art teachers that kind of gave me that needed support to be like, yeah, go on, you can do it. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's go.
mm,
Which I think sometimes, unfortunately, society or schools don't really encourage that. And I think we lo lose a lot of creatives that way, where they get kind of pushed into academics or a more stable choice, which, yeah, I think is a shame. So my experience was very lucky in that aspect.
mm. That's great to hear. And of course, the things that you've been mentioning there in terms of, yeah, even feeling like creativity is a path that you can choose.
Yeah.
And like you say, society, doesn't really promote that. Or certainly in your experience when you were in school, or even when I was in school,
Yeah,
it wasn't a promoted thing. And, we see that nowadays as well with arts programs being, underfunded and things like
absolutely.
that. And so, yeah, definitely, I think it's important to have that support either from your family or your friends or from another network. And that is
Yeah.
sort of what gave you the motivation and the inspiration that it can be possible. And
Yeah,
that's
completely. And or maybe even a community space like myself and Nat, an artist that I work with We Belong Here, we try and run every Sunday an art club for kids in Armley because of that exact reason of like if you and we don't even all we do is allow them to have the space for 2 hours to do whatever they want creatively and they come up with so many cool ideas, probably better than me to be honest. They come up with some great and they are just like, yeah, we want to do this. And it's about creating that space for young people to express themselves creatively and kind of have that space and time to dedicate themselves to art and have the tools to do that. Because unfortunately, like you said, in the education system, that isn't like respected or valued, and it's often like cut out in many contexts. So yeah.
Mm. That's great. That sounds like a really meaningful project that you're involved
Yeah,
with
it's
as
really
well
sweet. I really enjoy it.
with your art friend as well. It's not just all, commissions for all these companies and all these people, but you're also giving back to the community. And you do that quite a lot through your work, working with communities and things, which we will touch upon as well. But yes, as well as, the art club We Belong Here, you also run the Association of Illustrators meetup as well in Leeds, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. So that kind of came about because a friend of mine, Vicky, who's a great illustrator, you should check her out, Vicky Hughes. She was running these meetups and she needed a volunteer, so I came on and helped her. And yeah, exactly that. Like the Association of Illustrators is essentially kind of like a union for illustrators and has loads of really great resources and access to support. But the meetups are the idea that basically due to the nature of freelancing, it can be quite isolating because you're often having to work at home or you're an individual and you don't have that normal kind of like office community that a lot of workers have. So it's about kind of creating a space where someone can come and meet other illustrators and, have an enjoyable time, whether you want to get something off your chest and just be like, oh, this client is driving me insane. I don't know what to do about it. Or it's just like having a nice chat about anything. So yeah, I really enjoy running those sessions and we've had like a real arc of what we were trying to explore is right for the community. Like we started with workshops and now we've kind of, then we went into like a beer social and now we're kind of leaning more into weekend drawing sessions. So responding to what people want in Leeds. But yeah, those have been really nice. And like you said, kind of another aspect of community. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. I feel like it's very much needed in this day and age. I think especially, yeah, as a freelancer when you're, working from home and but also in terms of like technology and things, a lot of people are working from home as well. And so we are spending sort of more time isolated in our offices or, in our
Yeah.
rooms, working away and doing the things doing the work that we do. But it is also important to, meet face to face with people, exchange ideas and just, yeah, decompress in that way as
Yeah,
well. So that's
completely.
fantastic. Fantastic that you do that. Right. Yeah. So you've touched upon some really interesting things there. So I suppose the next question I want to ask you is, what does creativity mean to you sort of individually? And I guess that's kind of a loaded question in a sense, because yeah, everyone answers this question differently in terms of what creativity is to them. And so I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I recently have been kind of unpicking and pondering this question because I think my kind of career creativity feels very different to my creativity as an individual. And the question was more about me as an individual. And I think like recently I went traveling and I
Mm.
found the space to slow down and I had my out of office on and it was I had no one could contact me And it was great because I had the time to just stop and draw and reconnect with drawing. Um, and I think sometimes it's hard to spend 4 hours drawing a plant when you have like so many other things to do in your career. So it was really nice to find that space. And when I did spend that time to like draw, it brought a lot of kind of meditative mindfulness, which I'd kind of forgotten about. I think
Mm,
with when you do creativity for your career, it's always goal driven. You're always pushing towards a commission or a deadline or your portfolio. So you kind of become very almost addicted to the outcome. So it was really nice to reconnect with that kind of like meaning of creativity to me as an individual because having that time to stop and draw a plant for 4 hours brought me so much peace. And I was like,
mm.
oh yeah, I forgot that this is the main reason why I went into this in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I've tried to be doing is carving out some time to do that, um, to go and draw in museums or outdoors and just take that time because that's what creativity means to me as an individual, aside from my career.
Mm. Yeah, so I guess just the pure enjoyment, being
Yeah,
creative just because you can and n no strings attached to it. It's just
completely.
you're just being it, in the
Yeah.
moment, in a sense, like you're mentioning mindfulness, you're just doing it. And I think that, certainly for me, when I'm creative or painting or drawing or whatever, it's this feeling of just time stopping, and you're just
Ah,
in your
completely.
own world.
Yeah, it's like that beautiful movie. Is it called Soul? When he kind of goes up into that almost like imaginary place where time stops. And yeah, it's kind of like that, where if you
Yeah.
can achieve that, or sometimes when you get into the flow, yeah, time is a social construct that does not affect you.
For sure, definitely. Especially when you're creative. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. But I think you mentioned an interesting thing in terms of, yeah, being goal driven as well. And that, that's sort of another pitfall you can fall down with, being a creative in terms of choosing it as a career path, for
Mm,
work. And yeah, I suppose it's that idea of, you only get paid when the project is completed and, you're sort of going after it for the money, which is not always the case. Sometimes you take on a project because you just absolutely love it and you love the
yeah.
company you're working for and the people, the organizations. But obviously it's that idea that obviously you need money to live and to
Yeah.
pay for obviously everything. And so um yeah, and so definitely I feel like it's important to, like you say, detach that idea of creativity from money as well, because
Yeah.
sometimes it can take the fun out of it in a sense. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think, like you say, I think it means much more than just, doing something for money. And creativity isn't transactional in a way. It encompasses so much more, and sort of it crosses boundaries, does
Yeah.
creativity, and it
And I
does
think
sort
that's
of the impossible, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that is the kind of like paradox of working as a creative for your job is that, like you said, creativity isn't really transactional in the pure concept of what it is. Like it's so personal, and you're creating all these little beautiful ideas and sending them out there into the world. And sometimes, unfortunately, when that gets caught up in the realities and stresses of a career, that's quite a difficult relationship that constantly pushes and pulls um, as you go on your journey.
Hmm. 100%, yeah. And it's a tricky one, I don't know if anyone's figured that out yet, but I guess it's just a roller coaster in terms of it's a balance, and it's different for everybody in terms of how they achieve it in their own, freelance careers.
Completely. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a tricky one. So, right. So you decided very early on that, creativity is the thing you wanted to do. You were drawing in your spare time as a small child, and your parents luckily supported in what you wanted to do and nurtured that interest in you. And so then you decided to study it. And
Mm.
so why don't you talk a little bit about your sort of university experience?
Yeah.
And yeah, how did you find that?
I mean, I loved university. It was so much fun. I think for me, I took a year out in between school, as in like college and uni. And that was really good for me because it gave me a space to rest and like kind of yeah, just get off of the like education treadmill for a second. And I think that gave me a really good headspace for when I started university because I felt really like, yeah, let's go. Because I'd made the kind of decision that it's what I wanted to do, and I'd taken the rest that I needed to like get into that. And then, but it was quite interesting because a lot of other people at uni had chosen to do a foundation.
Hmm.
And at first, my first year experience was very much trying to play catch up because I feel like so many people have done foundation and been really playful and explorative. And I'd come straight from like a very fine art background into an illustration course. And my first year was all about trying to unpick basically what I learned in fine art because it was
Hmm.
I like what I used to do was a lot of like oil painting of like portraiture and landscape. And then obviously coming into like commercial illustration or whichever illustration you want to explore, contemporary. Yeah, it was about like, okay, well, pushing against all those rules of like reality and what it looks like in proportion and like perspective and trying to be truly playful. And that really like broke my brain for a bit. Um,
Hmm.
and then second year was very much about like exploring all of the facilities that we had available. So like trying basically anything under the sun, collage, like print work, screen printing, clay, like just trying everything and anything to try and find my thing. Not really necessarily with that intention, just being curious.
Hmm.
Uh, and then it kind of accidentally happened in that I was like a weird year group because COVID hit us like halfway through second
Ah,
year.
right.
Um, so we became like these weird creatures that lived at home and did uni online. Um,
Hmm.
and because of that, like I got stuck in Leeds. My parents live abroad, and I
Hmm.
got stuck here, and I was desperately trying to find something to do because I was so bored. Um, and I was part of these like Facebook groups of opportunities for creatives because we're all part of those trying to find things. Um, and I saw this post which was like looking for an artist to paint a media box. And I was like, ooh, that sounds fun because it was allowed during that time because it was outside. And I
Hmm.
was like, okay, get me out of the house. So I went and did that, and then that kind of caused everything to change at university because I came back and I confused all my tutors by being like, my thing is murals, and they were like, oh, okay, unexpected. And then uni, the third year of uni was unusual, I think, in the context that I started applying for things, and I like was really lucky in that I got quite a big commission
Hmm.
whilst I was at university. So I basically had a meeting with my tutors being like, I've secured this massive commission. I don't know what to do because I can't do it alongside my degree. But then turning
Hmm.
it down would be insanity. But
Hmm.
then how do I do this? And they were like, right, do it as your project and submit it. So it was like two birds, one stone. I was like, yes, this is great. Yeah. So my third year was very much about like basically almost becoming a freelance illustrator, but within the kind of like support network of the university. But yeah, I loved university because I think one of the things I really miss actually is the group crits that we used to have where like everyone would come together and you would present what you're working on and people would be like, oh, have you thought of this? Or you should change that. Or like, I'm stuck, what should I do? And like ideating together was such like a beautiful community, which I think you kind of not lose, but you have to re-find when you're a freelance illustrator.
Hmm.
But yeah, I loved university. It was the best. And like our Leeds Arts University was particularly good for like career-oriented things as well. So you felt really supported when you stepped out into the real world. Um,
Hmm.
there was like the careers department doing loads of things, and then there was the illustration like department themselves have integrated a lot of things into the course that help you. So yeah, I loved university. I kind of sometimes I have like these dreams where I'm like, I wish I could go back because you could just you were just making for the sheer enjoyment of making. And I think yeah, that was such a beautiful time to just like experiment without any commitments to clients.
Yeah, definitely. You touched upon a lot there, actually. You answered, I think, the question perfectly there. But I'm just so glad to hear that. you enjoyed it, despite the difficulty of, the lockdowns and being at home. And so was that third and final year, when you got that commission, was that, when everything was still shut down, you couldn't access university at all?
Yes, it was like a weird mix where I remember I was like working predominantly in my living room. I'd like brought everything down and like converted it into a mini studio and it was really weird. But then we kind of came back, but then they had to like teach to us behind screens and we were all social distancing and like
Hmm.
it all feels a bit fuzzy in my mind because it feels like such a ludicrous scenario to try and explain because now we've moved on so much thinking about all those weird things like you have to test before you go into university sounds literally so mad. But yeah, that's how it was, and it was just bizarre. But yeah, so it was like a weird mix of like we were allowed to come back for a bit, and then we had to go, and then there was loads of rules. It was what a weird time.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one there. Yeah, it was definitely very weird. I feel like it
Yeah.
was a year that was erased from history in a sense.
Yeah, and
Uh,
kind of your brain as well. When you start to think about it, you're like, God, did I really do that? That's so weird.
100%, yeah. But it's just great to hear that you used that in a way. And, for you, it wasn't wasted because all the things that you were doing, even though you were working out of your living room at one point, all that, led to something.
Yeah,
And then you
true.
went on to do those amazing, amazing commissions. And so, how about we touch upon that? So, you mentioned the big commission that you got whilst you were still at
Yeah.
uni. And so, can you tell us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, so it was it was kind of an accidental, well, basically what happened was I'd started doing these media boxes and I'd been connecting with these community groups. So there was a really great one called Mean with Street Art. There was another great one called CA Spaces. And by doing that, I kind of was slowly building this network and people would send me opportunities that were available. Um, and someone sent me a opportunity that was with Leeds City Council, but it was based in Morley, and they were doing like an art trail of lots of different things. And I applied, but I basically had no experience. So I didn't actually think I was going to get anything. Like I thought maybe I was going to get like I don't know, like a doodle on a window, those kind of like Posca pen
Oh,
things.
yes. Yeah.
And because there were lots of options, and when they said, "Oh, would you?" There was also a media box, which I thought, okay, well, I'll probably get that. And you had to submit a design which at the time as a student I had time to do.
Mm.
Now I think it's outrageous that they ask you to submit a design for free. But anyway, that's a different topic for a different day. Um, and I submitted a design and it went really well. And I got an email saying like, "Oh, congratulations! Would you be interested in doing the window installation?" And I had in my head I had it as a Posca pen, and I was like, "Yeah, of course I'd be up for that." What it turned out to be was 52 artworks that would be installed in the windows of an abandoned building across 3 stories. Yeah, exactly. That was my face.
Wow.
I was like, I instantly was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then instantly was like, oh my God, what have I done? I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And that's because there's no way I had experience with this. I honestly, to this day, yeah, that was like a bizarre scenario for me when I was a student.
Wow.
Basically ran to my tutors and was like, what do I do now? And I was really lucky in that there was a well, he was a visiting lecturer called Ian Kirkpatrick, who is an amazing artist. You should check him out anyway. And I'd done a workshop with him, and I remember researching his work, and he'd done one of these kind of things where you do panels in buildings. And I emailed him basically just being like, "Hi, I'm starting out. I have no idea what I'm doing. If you could give me any advice, that would be hugely appreciated." And he was such a sweetheart. And he literally laid it out so clearly for me like, this is the kind of material you need. Be careful with this. You need to do it in this format. These are some great printers. And honestly, that is the kindness of him to have done that. Like looking
Mm.
back, it was just so, so kind to take his time and to share that knowledge with me. Because he really helped me like elevate my career by far. And yeah, and then basically yeah, that project was kind of me realizing that I had this like love of local heritage because I started researching this building and it turned out to have the most insane history. It was like um built in like the early 1900s and originally was as kind of a theater, and there was this amazing strong woman who performed called
Mm,
Volcana. I'll do a little show.
okay.
And
Yeah, yeah.
put up on the video right now. But this is like a giant piece about her I did.
Oh, wow. Oh, so was this actually part of it then?
So this is something I revisited like way later because I just got really obsessed with this character because she was like this strong woman who was
Wow.
like an advocate for like women doing exercise, which apparently at the time was not a thing.
Amazing.
And then
Wow.
yeah, and then I did and then oh, I've got another panel. Hang on. Oh, this one was attached to the wall. But basically, um, the other like period of its life was a cinema.
Oh, wow.
So I did this.
Oh,
This is like the print sample that I had.
oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, which is really cool. So it's like a piece of metal essentially, and then it's printed on.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but anyway, the building. I'm getting distracted by the things in my studio. Um, the building was originally a theater, and then became a cinema. Then became this like three-story bingo hall, which is hilarious. And
Wow.
then it was an Italian restaurant. So like it had the most amazing history. And I got really into that. And then because it was during COVID, I was like having to ring people rather than like go to communities.
Mm,
And I just got down this like rabbit hole of loads of people telling me their stories about this building. And that's kind of when I figured out that oral histories were really interesting because I was like, wow, all these people have these amazing stories that are connected to this building.
mm,
I think that project is when I started piecing together this really beautiful relationship between oral histories and people's connection with places, and those beautiful stories that might get lost if they weren't documented. You know, the ones which are like, oh yeah, I met my wife at the cinema and we had like a cheeky kiss and da da da. All those like
yeah.
beautiful little moments that aren't necessarily written down in history, and then tying that in with the history that is written down and using archival photography and like finding out that relationship of how can we use public art to showcase and celebrate local heritage in a way that's like that people can that people would find interesting and get like
Mm,
kind of the creative tool of illustration can like hook people in to learn about it. And especially with this project, like it was such an ugly building because, well, the building itself was beautiful, but it was all boarded up with this like ugly plywood, and it was abandoned, and it was such like an eyesore, which is a shame because it used to be such like a heart of the community. So it's
mm,
really nice to kind of use public art as a way of like giving life back to that space for people. And I that definitely was the project that kind of allowed me the space to figure that out. And then that was something that I essentially then explored in my career. But I was just lucky that I was a student when it happened because it gave me the support system to figure out the project management element of it, and also just so much like logistics that you don't realize has to happen. I think one of the key things, like when you're a student, you just theorize what you'd like to do. So you're like, and then you mock it up on like what Photoshop. But the realities of having to actually do it, there are so many emails that are required to like do things
mm.
like liaising with printers and getting quotes and doing your maths and getting all the measurements right and then getting it printed and like then getting it like making sure it's oh, that was another thing I forgot on this project. I learned how to use Adobe Illustrator um and yeah, on the job, which
That's the
is
best way.
yeah, a steep learning curve. I remember my housemate at the time, Evie. She's a great graphic designer. You should check her out, Evie Crook. Um, she she tried to teach me how to use a Wacom. And oh my gosh, it was such a disaster initially because she like left me to it. And then I remember she came back and she was like, how's it going? And I just burst into tears because I was like, it doesn't make any sense. Because I'd obviously
Mm,
spent my entire life drawing on paper and then learning all, but then I guess it's quite a good way to learn because you're getting paid technically. to
Mm.
do that. But yeah, that was a steep learning curve to learn how to use Adobe Illustrator on a commission. And interesting. But I think that is the reason why I kind of tell this to people, because technically it's information that I definitely don't want the client, well, it doesn't matter, it's so long ago now, but the client to know is that it's just more for other illustrators to know that even if you don't necessarily have the experience or even the knowledge of how to do something, you can kind of you will figure it out on the job because like I didn't have the experience to do 52 window panels and I didn't even know how to use vectors. So like just apply anyway and then figure it out. And by reaching out to other people, that's how you can hopefully. I find that the illustration community is very friendly and they will help other artists. Like artists will help artists out. And I think that's how I built my career. And that's why I always, if people message me on Instagram, although I'm awful at like keeping on top of my socials, I do try and respond the best I can. And once I get the time, I like send this huge thing of just being like, right, this is how you do it, because that's how you help others up into the industry. Um,
Mm. Wow. That was beautiful. That was beautiful in and of itself. There you go. Interview finished. There we go. No, but that was great, honestly. No, that was fascinating. And there's so many things in there that we can unpack in a sense, but I think the thing that stood out for me was, how you were saying that the community is important and that's so you sort of lift each other up. One person suggests a job to you or offers you an opportunity to do something, or they send you over a competition. That all these little things and these networks are the thing that sort of keep the creative community alive,
yeah,
because
completely.
yeah, because at the end of the day, if we didn't do that, then all of us would just be lost and just yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really important to do that. And like you were saying, it's important to, apply for things even though they scare you because you don't know what you're doing.
Completely. And the thing, my mum gave me such good advice that I always like run through my head when I'm applying. It's like, if you don't apply, it's definitely going to be a no. So like you might as well just try because it opens the chance of a yes. Whereas if you never even went for it, then you're definitely not going to get it.
Hmm.
Um, so that was quite good advice because then it just makes you be like, okay, fine, I'll just do it and see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's great. And I feel like I don't know, when people think of like graduates, fresh out of uni and this sort of thing, they don't really, for some reason, they want you to have all the experience already. But in a sense, that's how you gain experience by
Yeah,
doing things that you've never done before, or maybe you're not super qualified to do them. But by doing it, that's how
yeah.
you're going to learn. And yeah.
Completely. Quite a ruthless cycle actually within the creative industry when you're starting out of this paradox of you can't get any work until you have work experience, but then the irony is you can't get any work experience unless someone gives you an opportunity to work on it.
Mm,
So yeah, that's why with We Belong Here, Nat and I, when we have big mural installations, we often try and bring in a lot of artists and a lot of volunteers so that they have the opportunity to put it on their portfolio and kind of crack that cycle. Um, yeah, we're really like, and we're trying to develop more things to create those opportunities because, yeah, it's really hard when you're starting out.
yeah, 100%. If someone doesn't give you an opportunity to try something, then you're really never going to get that opportunity in a sense to enter and have that experience that, some employers or companies that want to work with someone, they sort of expect you to already have that experience, which you can't get the experience without getting the opportunity and getting the
Yeah,
chance
and
to
I
do
think
something.
yeah, another like element to that, I guess, it's like putting yourself out there for the opportunity because you can only be successful in like say for example if you're applying, you can only be successful if you did that initial first step of like applying. And I think I know it's really difficult, but um it's it's a hard term to say like hustle because it's like quite a toxic term in a way. But when if I'm talking about my experience rather than advice,
Mm,
my experience was very much like when I was at uni, I was trying everything and I was looking at loads of different opportunities and keeping my ear to the ground and applying for so many things. And I think that's true across my career, actually, like constantly applying for things. And one honesty is that I didn't get all of the things that I apply for. And that's just the nature of the beast, which is unhelp like it's just annoying, but it is
Mm.
how it is. But it is very much about the hard work of putting it in. So I think obviously I can go into advice of like where I look for things, but yeah, my experience was very much just trying lots of different things and putting myself out there. And in the process of doing that, being very open, like I don't know, like really weird examples are on that commission I was drawing on location. And this guy came up to me and started chatting to me whilst I was drawing, and I was just kind of a bit like, I don't know where this is going, but whatever. Anyway, it ended up that he was a local pub owner and wanted some murals. And he was just like, would you be up for painting at my pub? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So it was kind of like one of those, if you're open to it and I think one of the nicest things is I really enjoy connecting with people. I just like having a chat. And that has
Mm.
kind of accidentally helped me a lot in the sense that like yeah, I get along really well with the people that I work with, like my clients, and then they come back to me for work or just like random things in the community like that. So often opportunities come in the most unexpected ways sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that's super important in a sense, that idea of just talking and communicating, because no one's going to know that you're a creative and doing your murals. Like
Yeah.
it's not written on your forehead.
No,
And so
exactly,
you,
exactly.
you
And also
just
just being open just for the sheer enjoyment of connecting with that person rather than like wanting to get something out of it, I guess. Because it's like that neg I don't really like the word networking because it's always this very like transactional term. Whereas actually if you just connect with people for the that purpose, then often it feels very like genuine. So probably will come out something will come out of it most likely because it's very genuine in that initial intent.
mm,
Um, but
yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I think it's a tough line to tread in a sense, because like
Mm,
you do want to be compensated for the work and the
completely.
stuff
Yeah.
that you're doing
No,
and
yeah,
your
that's like a
material.
different topic in of itself. Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's what's always so hard when you were starting out and people want to give you like experience or like work for free, and it's just such a difficult line to tread.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you there. So we were sort of touching upon my sort of next question, which was about, yeah, cultivating this like self-belief, in yourself, like, whether you have studied or whether you have a great portfolio of work and like you're ready to start putting yourself out there. Um, but then, what do you do if like, yeah, like this fearfulness or this, this sort of niggling voice in the head that's like, am I good enough to
Yeah.
actually demand money for my drawings and things?
100% you are good enough just straight off the bat. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like, but I think I had this nice moment the other day where like a duo that I really like, a music duo called Paco Amorosa and Catriel. They've released a song that was called Imposter Syndrome, and it was based off of the back of they basically did this like really successful Tiny Desk concert, and it exploded and went super viral. And then they made an album after. And I loved it because the first song basically is all about how they get this such bad imposter syndrome because the Tiny Desk went really well. And now they're suddenly famous and now they don't really know what to do with that fame. And
Mm,
I just really loved like such what I perceive as like really skilled, amazing musicians being so open about this like niggling voice in your head. And like I really just liked that they just called it as it is and just it kind of made you feel a bit less isolated in that feeling. And like, well, if they can feel that, then every creative ever feels like that. But yeah, I think for me personally, my experience was like my mum, the wise owl that she is, I feel like I've talked about all her advice today, but she gave me this like really good advice once where she was like, art is so subjective in the sense that like someone could absolutely love your work and the
Mm.
literal next person standing next to them would hate it. And the beauty of that is that it gives you so much freedom because she was like, she used to be an accountant, and she was like, if you're just a bad accountant, that's it. You're just a bad accountant. There's no subjectivity to that. But like, if someone out there will love your work, and someone out there most likely won't, and that's just the way it is. So just don't like worry about it. Just put it out there, and most likely there will be people you'll find who will love it. And I think that gave me so much freedom to just be like, oh, okay, well, fine. Like some people won't like it, and that's okay, and just like crack on with it. And yeah, I very rarely come across people who will say that to my face. I did have it once, which was an interesting experience. Um, but which I was like, okay, that's your opinion. But yeah, I
Oh,
think it's just kind of like that really helped me kind of just steer a strong path of like, okay, well, it brings me a lot of joy and it seems to bring other people a lot of joy, and I'll keep pursuing that. Yeah.
yeah. No, I feel like that's really important. I feel like the motivation within yourself has to be sort of bigger than any sort of external motivation in a sense,
Yeah.
whether that is, the money or fame or whatever. You've got to just do it for the pure love of doing it because, it just makes your soul sing and you just can't imagine doing anything else. And,
Yeah,
that
completely.
sort of has to be so strong that it carries you through,
Yeah,
any difficulties and difficult times and all of it. And
yeah,
so,
completely. And I think
yeah.
I found that a lot with when I started working more and more with communities. And I think that kind of gave my art a bigger purpose. Like I was kind of almost gifting my skills as a visual artist to community stories. And I felt that felt really meaningful of like documenting these moments of memory or documenting a community's feeling about something. And the more that I've developed that, and now that I'm working with We Belong Here, and that's what Nat and I do is majoritively with communities and developing artwork over a long period of engagement. That to me feels like the real kind of driving creative force of like you have this ability to come up with ideas and creativity and do something. And it's really amazing to be able to share that with a community who can then feel a part of the process. And that has become such a big part of what I do now, which is quite interesting because I think that is almost steering my career more than the original illustration that I would kind of um, learn the technicality of at university.
Hmm. Yeah, that's quite interesting that you say that. So do you feel, because obviously you've received quite a lot of commissions after leaving uni.
Yeah.
You've done the pavilion in Morley, you've done more sort of site-specific murals on Briggate in Leeds as
Yeah.
well.
Oh my God.
And whether that's the Queen's Hotel or,
Yeah,
you've just
that was a
you've
good
done
one.
just done so much, and then other cities like Wakefield.
Yeah, that
And
was
and now I think I don't know if I can say this, but are you working on something in Halifax? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That
I
one's
don't know
a
if we can talk about that yet or
yeah,
not.
we can. Yeah, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, that one in Halifax is super exciting because I'm collaborating with Natasha Joseph, and we're hired as a duo under We Belong Here.
Hmm.
And what's really that project is so amazing because it's all about the South Asian contribution to the textile industry in
Hmm.
Halifax. And it's about using archival material and collating oral histories and then combining that into a visual language that communicates this kind of like wider narrative of a community and the people who made that community and their contributions to this really like meaningful part of history. So it's kind of yeah, pulling together so many different elements of like history and oral histories, but also a community and a movement of time. But what's unusual about this specific commission is that we're designing it, but then it's being sent to a stonemason and
Oh.
they're etching it into the ground. So it's a literal stone installation that's like 85 meters long and will be installed next to the Peace Hall. So it's sandwiched between the Industrial Museum and the Peace Hall. Um, So yeah, it's honestly monumental. It's quite hard to wrap my head around.
Wow.
But we've been actually this is some of the illustrations that we've been working on to like develop that. But it's been really fun to work with Nat and explore a new visual language and try and kind of because we're working together, we had to break the rules of both of our kind of practices of like in my style, I know how to do everything, but because we're working as a duo, it's really fun because you're like, okay, we're starting from scratch. What does an eye look like in this new visual language, you know? And it was really
Mm.
fun. And we've been doing this really accidental, but really like creative activity where I'll leave something in the studio because I've had to go do something. And then she'll come into the studio and she's like, oh, and she picks it up and she starts working on it. And then she'll leave it. And then I come and I start working on it. And it's been such like a really gorgeous, organic way of developing work. Um, yeah, so I'm really excited to see what it'll look like because we're still in the process of making it. But yeah, it will be installed at the end of this year, hopefully, if everything goes to plan. So yeah, that's the big boy that's happening at the moment.
Wow. No, that's fantastic. No, definitely. It sounds exciting. And also, seeing your artwork in that, new sort of medium of,
Yeah,
having
completely.
it in stone, which is
Yeah, it's so
quite
strange.
different.
Like this time, I'll show you something fun. Um, when instead of like before, when I showed you a metal sample,
Yeah.
they sent us like literal rocks in the
Oh,
post.
wow. Actual
Of like,
rocks.
yeah, they were like, this is like, instead of this is the color you could use, like a paint, they were like, here's the color you can use. It's a rock.
Oh,
We were like,
wow.
oh my God, I don't know how to wrap my head around this. But yeah, it's a really interesting challenge.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. But exciting as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
completely.
definitely. Yeah, well, that's just fascinating. I can't wait to go see it in person as well.
Me too, me
Yeah,
too.
that'd be great. Fantastic. Um, but yeah, I'm just trying to think in terms of mulling over what we've been talking about. So I feel like it's interesting how, your work with the community and partnering up with another, creative person, Nat, and, working as a duo, that
Yeah,
sort of helped you as well in a way because it's no longer just the lone artist in the studio with their work. You're collaborating with other people, so in a sense you're sort of sharing the load but also making it more exciting and also easier because then, you get different perspectives and different ways of looking at the world or looking at the problem or
completely.
the project. And like you said, it was interesting, when you left the room and then Nat entered and, both of you were sort of playing on each other's strengths, but you were doing it differently, but it worked
Yeah,
together, which is a wonderful
exactly.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah, and
wonderful.
I think like I think this actually goes really nicely back to that point I was trying to make about being open in that the way I met Nat was because I'd gone to like university talk, which was about funding. So there's kind of like multiple timelines that come into this like moment of the
Mm.
universe. One was I like met someone at Paper Chase called Lucy who like told me I should follow this company called We Belong Here. So I followed them. So that's like years back whilst I was still a student. And then I saw them years later post that they were looking for a mural assistant and I applied. Just being like, oh yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to be a mural assistant. So that's like those two timelines are running along. And then I go to this talk at university about applying for funding. And in the break, I like check my emails and it's like, congratulations, you've been commissioned by We Belong Here to be a mural assistant.
Wow.
Thanks very much, Natasha Joseph. And I was like, isn't that the person running this session? And I realized it was
Ah.
Nat who was running the workshop. So afterwards, I went up and I was like, hey, you've just hired me. I'm Kat. Nice to meet you. And
Oh,
then
wow.
basically, it was this really funny moment of the universe coming together. And we just hit it off instantly and became really close. And we bonded over, at the time, we were trying to apply for an arts council, which anyone who's tried to apply for that will know the ups and downs of that bonding experience. So Nat and I kind of like went through that together and then we painted this mural that I'd applied for. And as we were doing that, we became so, it was so clear that we had so many things in common of like how we like to do things and the ethics and the meaning and the purpose behind projects. And at the same time, if we're talking about honesty, both of us, I think more so me, but also Nat, we were both struggling with securing commissions. Like I'd had a run of, I think it got to 10 no's in total of things that I'd apply for and just got no, 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 no. And those horrible emails, which are like, unfortunately, and then you don't have to read the rest because you're like, oh no.
You know what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. So then the two of us were like, right, we're both having the same problem. Let's just duo up and apply together and see if anything starts happening. And then it just, from that point on, we just kept getting yeses to the point that
Mm.
ironically, we almost had like the reverse stress. Like we were so broke and stressed out that we weren't getting anything. And then we got really accidentally stressed out because suddenly all the work started coming in and we were like, oh my God, what do we do with all this work? Which is
Wow.
a lovely problem to have. But yeah, like you said, because we're a duo, it it's just such a beautiful connection of like two minds of different experiences and different cultures as well, because Nat's from India. So the
Mm.
two of us kind of really bounce off each other, and that moment of ideation at the beginning of a project is always the best bit because we're like, oh, what if you did this? And then it's like, oh yeah. And that's like I've really enjoyed that as a duo because I think, like you said, the traditional path of an illustrator is very like solitary or individual. So yeah, but this is a path that's really worked for me, and I'm really excited about where it's headed as well. So
Mm. That's great. And it's also good to hear in a sense that things have started blossoming,
yeah,
since you created that partnership with each other, which I
yeah,
feel like that's an interesting thing in itself. Why do we even think that we have to do it alone in the first place?
yeah,
Why can't we partner up? It makes more sense, obviously to work with other people. And then all the successes that you have, obviously you can share it amongst each other. And it's just a
yeah.
lot better in that sense. And so,
Exactly, yeah. Because then when we get big commissions, like for example, we have a basketball court mural coming up where we're painting the floor, also in Halifax.
oh,
And that's coming up, and we've got a big installation happening at the Maybank holiday. But we have to hire a huge artist team to help us, and that's really nice because then we create opportunities for other mural artists in the city. Um, and yeah, it's just yeah. Where was I wanting to go with this? Oh, I wonder if one of the this is an interesting question that I don't know, I'm asking you a question, but it's kind of I think I've been pondering it a lot of this concept of style within the illustration industry, and I wonder if that's partly why we feel like it has to be an individual's path because you develop this style that people come to you for.
mm,
And therefore, like, how do you share a style with someone else? And that's what's so exciting about this kind of like project with the stone installation is that Nat and I had to create a style together. And in doing that, we actually make a style for each project that we do according to what's appropriate for that community. And personally, I really like that method. I prefer when the outcome is truly influenced by the community engagement and the research that you do because it means that it's more connected with that specific site and that the need of that community. Which is very at odds with the kind of like traditional illustration industry where you have this specific style that you apply to everything. Um, so yeah, it's kind of an ongoing discussion that I'm unpicking with myself, but also like other illustrators.
yeah, 100%. I think you answered that question beautifully, actually. I totally agree with what you're saying there. And it does make sense, doesn't it? In a sense that it's sort of expected as an illustrator that you have that style, and then that's sort of the thing that people hire you for is for your individual style that no one else supposedly has. And
Yeah.
so I suppose that's where that idea of being an individual and not being able to collaborate comes in.
Mm.
But that's also limiting, isn't it, in a sense? Because, like you say, it's more important for you to co-create a new style together that's informed with what you're doing, and then that has even more meaning than just, you going away by yourself and trying to figure everything out by yourself and from one
Yeah,
perspective.
completely.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
enriches it if there's more influences coming in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
completely. Um,
definitely.
Yeah. And also just from a fun point of view, like Nat and I often work with kids and they come up with the funniest stuff. Like I'm actually surrounded by their work at the moment because we're doing the basketball court floor mural, which is all inspired by kids' work. But they just come up with the funniest
Oh,
thing
wow.
of like these hilarious doodles.
They're
Um,
fantastic.
or not doodles rather, they're just they're called the doodle sheets, but they're actually just amazing drawings. But
Yeah.
and they just come up with
Oh,
some crazy stuff and like a really grinning snail. And I'm like, that's hilarious.
wow.
All of that. And they just,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think sometimes, yeah, they're such a great, like kids have such an amazing capacity for imagination without any restraints of
Mm,
adult kind of mind telling you, oh, it needs to look this way or that. And that's quite fun when you work with them to make something because then your artwork is influenced by that freedom that they have.
yeah, 100%. I agree. Yeah. I think it links back to that, famous quote of, everyone's creative, but the trouble is staying a creative once, you grow up. And I don't know who said
Yeah.
that. I think it might have been Picasso or somebody. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because he
but
spent ages, didn't he? He did like that period of time when he was it his nieces and nephews, or it was like some I can't remember, but he spent time trying to basically relearn how to be so free with your drawings, learning from
mm,
how kids draw because they don't have those constraints.
yeah.
Yeah, like you said. And it's kind of interesting to then work with adults who, like sometimes we go into elderly communities and try to kind of give back that freedom. So we have this very nice organic push and pull of like working with so many kids that then give us the ideas and energy to then give back to the elderly community. It's very like cyclical in that way.
Mm. Yeah, and that's just fantastic. I feel like what you're doing is great because, in a sense, you've not settled on a style because you're constantly evolving and changing it, and it depends on what project you're doing it with. And so, in that sense, I feel that, you're growing in a sense. But if you're
Yeah,
just
completely.
sticking to sort of the safe style and way of working that you've always done, yeah, how is your sort of career going to grow from that? So
Yeah,
it does kind of make sense that since you've partnered up, you've got more opportunity and, in a sense, your creative, you know, ways of working, they're expanding as well because you have to think of new ways of working and
yeah,
interacting
completely.
with
Yeah.
others. Yeah,
And
which I
this is
think
kind of
is
like a very new development for me as well, because Nat and I have only started working together. It was early last year. So yeah, these are exactly what you said of just kind of like this new kind of exploration of different styles has
mm,
actually been very exciting. And I find that path is the one that I'm now leading down. So yeah, you've caught me at a very interesting turning point in my career to talk about these things. But
no. Good, good. Fascinating. No, it's fascinating listening to it as well. And I hope people will be inspired as well by what they're hearing. So, from what I gather, sort of the majority of the commissions that you've gotten were through sort of councils or local
yeah,
authorities. Am I right in thinking that?
yeah, so it's kind of a mix of especially the public art commissions are almost predominantly councils or some forms. So like in the past I've worked with the NHS. That was at a specific hospital in Halifax. I worked with Leeds City Council, Wakefield Council. I've also I worked in Skipton with a museum. I worked with Leeds City Museum. So it's kind of like these big social organizations or government bodies because they're the ones who secure the funding. So usually the they have either sought funding or been allocated funding, and then they provide an open call of which I've then found through many different platforms or people sending it to me, or I find it on social media and things, and then you apply. So it's very much a process of like pitching.
Hmm.
Yeah, like I've spoken about, sometimes it's unsuccessful and sometimes it is successful, and that's just the nature of the beast.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's kind of how I've predominantly got my work. And in amongst that, I did do quite a lot of like when I was starting out, I did a lot of commercial work, which was a bit more straightforward. Um, But for me, it doesn't really like we were talking earlier about what kind of gets you going as a like what gives you purpose as a creative. And I struggled more with those commercial ones. I didn't find the soul of it. And I think
Mm.
that's definitely what steered me more into like becoming more community driven and focusing on that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's good that you found that because, like we were saying, creativity isn't transactional. We're not just in it just for the money. It's
Yeah.
also it's something much larger beyond ourselves that we sort of hope to impart through our creative, things that we do. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you're finding your path in that as well. And sort of, we've talked about, making murals in the public environment and these sort of oral histories, which you've become really interested in. So I guess we've sort of answered that question in terms of, how important it is. Because, like you say, if we don't discuss and if we don't talk about these ideas and these histories with the community, and if we don't record them in a way, then they can be lost to time if they're not
Yeah,
passed down.
completely.
Yeah, so that's really amazing in terms of what you're doing is you're trying to sort of visualize that, translate it in a creative way via illustration. And then you're linking it to these site-specific places
Yeah.
sometimes, whether it was that commission for the pavilion in Morley, and then it's sort of like the history comes alive in a sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely. And I think Berlin for me is like a huge inspiration for that. That's where my family lives. And Berlin has this really like honest and open relationship with its history in the sense that it doesn't shy away from the horrors of what was committed in that country. And I think that's really important and that our country could learn some things from that, to be honest. Um, and I think, but one of the things I find most interesting is that they have this really unusual relationship with educating their people in the public spaces. So I think sometimes museums and galleries, although brilliant, can already create a barrier in the sense of like someone might have the idea of like, oh, I don't feel like I am interested in history or I don't feel welcome in that space. So then don't make this the kind of like commitment to go. And I think also within the museums, it's like, how is that history then told? Because obviously it has a specific narrative within that space. So when you break it out of those confines and bring it into the public's kind of realm, that is a really exciting time to I think Berlin's so great because it educates its people in the location that it happened. And I think a perfect example, although very tragic, is the tripping stones. So I don't know if you know about them, but they're these little metal, they're the size of a cobblestone essentially. And they're just a tiny bit above the pavement. So you trip on them and you look down and it's in front of an apartment and it tells you the name of someone who was stolen and taken to a concentration camp during World War II. And it's so powerful because it reminds you so deeply of people and how history is not just numbers in a book that's in a library. It's people and it happened to people. And that relationship is so important to then remember what we don't want to repeat in the future. And I think, especially in such difficult times as we're living in now, it's so important to remember history and like how the past can have such an influence on how we choose to make actions in the future. And public art can give you that space to document that. And I think, especially with this commission in Halifax, like the South Asian contribution to the textile industry was monumental. And unfortunately, it hasn't really been professionally archived in any way. And the document, it's actually quite shocking how
Mm,
the archives are lacking this really important, vital part of the town's history. And this commission has really unearthed that and tried, it's only really touching the surface of the amazing stories that are out there. And that is so important because they need to be documented in order to accurately depict the history. Like South Asian community was monumental and pivotal to the textile industry. But if you went to the archives, you wouldn't know that necessarily. And I think that's why it's so important, and pulling that into a public space so that it can educate everyone and also celebrate those people who haven't necessarily been celebrated in the archives. Like there's it's another hour's worth of conversation.
Yeah,
But yeah,
definitely.
it can become very political, your choices. And I think the importance of history and the importance of being honest about history is what our country needs to work on. And I think public art has a very interesting role to play in that. If as a country we can become braver to do so, I think we have a lot to learn from Berlin.
Yeah, that's fascinating and really important, like you state there as well. Wonderful. So I think we're going to start wrapping up,
Yeah.
unfortunately, although it's
That's
lovely to
fine.
chat to you. So I was wondering, you know, over the course of what you've experienced so far, what are sort of three tips which you could impart onto someone who is wanting to follow a creative route, but are maybe not sure if that's the thing that they want to do, or maybe three things that you wish you would have heard when you were starting out?
Yeah.
What are sort of three tips of advice that you could give us?
I think this is always a really interesting question because I recently just did a panel talk at the university and I got asked a very similar question because and I had this kind of like internal dialogue in the moment where I was like, the advice that I would give right now is so different to the advice I would have given a year ago, in the sense that um when I first started, I was so ruthlessly driven, to the point that the advice that I would have given in that time was like, just apply for as much as you can and like keep working and and it was very like career driven, my advice. But now I've been working for so many years and I've kind of been, my advice has shifted a lot more to maybe focusing on well-being and being careful about the pace and the kind of like work-life balance, because but the irony in this question is that I would give myself this advice to my younger self and my younger self would not listen in any capacity at all, because my
Yeah.
advice would be like, slow down, like look after yourself and stop pushing so hard,
Mm.
um, because it will work out. But I would not have listened. I would have been like, yeah, yeah, great advice, and just would have like kept working, which is what
Yeah.
kind of got me into this situation in the first place. But I think it's one thing that I recently received some advice which I've been like kind of chewing on and really enjoying recently. It was um someone said to try and find the joy in each of your projects. And I really liked that because it was like, okay, well, within this project, what's the thing that's like fueling that kind of inner creative that we were talking about earlier? And really like focusing on that and allowing that to be your driving force. And that kind of helps you then with your well-being as well, because you can focus on what's important. Um, but yeah, I think advice is always one of those tricky things of, you want to say slow down, but obviously if you're building a career, it's you feel so
Mm.
so much pressure to keep going. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think another piece of advice is, I know we are talking about three different things, but one of the things that when I reclaimed that space for my personal work when I was traveling, is to my advice to my like previous self would be to try and safeguard that space to work, to make work for me, for
Mm.
no other reason than the sheer enjoyment of doing that. Because I think in my career, I lost my way with that. Um, and I think I should have safeguarded it more, I think, because that allows you to fill the well if you're constantly giving. Um, yeah, to try and make more space for the enjoyment of doing it for yourself away from clients.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that,
Yeah,
Ekaterina.
no worries.
And where can people find you? You know, if they want to get in touch to commission you, or we want to
Yeah.
follow what you're up to, where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah, so I have a website, Ekaterina Sheath. I'm on Instagram as well. I'm also, yeah, Instagram and my website are the best places to kind of see what I'm up to. But I'm also obviously part of We Belong Here. So you can look up We Belong Here UK on Instagram and on a website as well. And you can follow us along. So yeah, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out on Instagram and I'll do my best to get in touch.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I will definitely try and link up everything we've mentioned here, all the artists mentioned,
Yeah,
all
that
the
would be great.
work and your portfolio so people can get in touch with you. And thank you as well, Katerina, for sharing your
No
time with
worries.
me as well. I do appreciate you. I'm one of those people that reached out to you via email. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
so yes, exactly. This is a wonderful example of the creative community supporting each other to
Yeah,
make wonderful things happen. And so
completely.
thank you for being today and giving your
My
time to
pleasure.
us. Thank you, and hopefully the rest of your career will go smoothly as well as it has
Yeah.
just begun. You've just begun your journey, so hopefully
Yeah,
it'll be as
true.
wonderful as wonderful.
Well, thank you so much.